They came with cold corrections for the others, the ones whose lives were lettered in shifting script. And I turned the page. I said, "It is not my story they are stripping." They came with clauses like caltrops for the dreamers, who built their truth from bone and breath and myth. And I looked away. I said, "It is not my myth they are muffling." They came with blades of bureaucracy, filed fine to fit beneath the flickering tongue of law. And I did not taste the blood. I said, "It is not my voice they are slicing." But laws do not end where they begin. They seep, they slither, they split the seams of safety. And soon they came with sharpened standards for the woman who wore her hair too hard, her spine too straight, her silence too solemn. And they asked, "What proof of your place? What papers, what pulse, what pattern?" And I did not have the parchment, only pain and breath and blood. They came for the tough talking tomboys, the ones who boxed and barked and never bent. And I said, "They are not like me," but I felt the scissors circle my name. They came for the low-voiced loners, with broad backs, with barren wombs, and asked, "What defines you if not this?" And I had no answer that outlived the frost. They came with definitions dressed as decisions, and I had no defence but dust, and dust does not cradle a woman who does not conform. They came for the unmothered, the unmarried, the ones whose gender was not softened by submission, and they asked, "Are you woman enough to warrant this space?" And I could not prove it. My breasts were not a banner, my hips not a homeland, my silence not a shield. They came for the raped and said, "She must have been mistaken. Was she even a woman in the way the law now sees?" And the court nodded, and the wounds closed without a whisper. They came for the battered and said her shelter was not hers to seek. She could not prove her sex in sanctioned terms. She failed their purity test. They came for the dead and scrawled their womanhood with ink that had never touched their truth. And finally, they came for me. Not because I'd shifted shape, but because I hadn't, because I dared to be a woman in a world where woman meant only what the law allowed. I stood in the ashes of the word that once held my mother, my sister, myself. And I saw it was never about them. It was always about all of us. And now there is no mirror that does not lie. No law that does not ask to see the body before it hears the soul. Behind the lines. This poem is a stark warning about the quiet violence of legal language and the cost of looking away. Drawing on Pastor Martin Niemöller's chilling confession, first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. It reimagines his structure to explore how power isolates and erodes, one silence at a time. Where Niemöller spoke of political apathy in the face of fascism, this poem speaks to legal apathy in the face of erasure, of rights, of womanhood, of safety. At its heart is a response to recent changes in UK law, where the definition of woman under the Equality Act has been narrowed by the Supreme Court to mean biological sex. This ruling means transgender women, even with a gender recognition certificate, are not legally recognised as women under the Act. What begins as a blow to trans rights ripples outward, challenging not just the recognition of trans people, but the very meaning of womanhood in law. The poem does not simply lament this decision, it challenges it. It asks what happens when womanhood is placed under state surveillance, when recognition becomes something you must prove, and when protections are extended only to those who conform to a strict biological script. It forces us to consider how cisgender women, especially those who are gender non-conforming, infertile, unmarried, or survivors of violence, may find themselves scrutinised, excluded or disbelieved under this new legal regime. Each stanza marks a failure to act, a choice to look away, to rationalise the targeting of others, until the law circles back to the speaker herself. By then the ground has already shifted. The protections she assumed were hers by default have been hollowed out, redefined and denied. What began as someone else's loss becomes her own. This is a poem not of nostalgia or resistance, but of reckoning. It is a mirror held to the future being shaped now, a future in which womanhood is not lived or felt, but inspected and approved by the state. It challenges the law not just for what it does to trans people, but for what it will ultimately do to everyone it claims to protect. In the end, it asks a single devastating question. When we allow rights to be taken from others, who will be left to defend our own?